I am Lexi Call. I manage the Best Friends Life Saving Center in Manhattan.
Hi, I'm Dr. Joe DiBraccio. I am a private practice veterinarian. I own a couple of veterinary hospitals in the Hudson Valley region of New York State.
We both are from New York, clearly. We're going to talk really fast. I'm Italian, so I talk with my hands. So we got to keep you up and awake. Right after lunch, everybody's in a lull. But today we're talking about partnering with local vet clinics to save more lives in the process. It is something that I'm very passionate about. Being in Manhattan, our center is very small, so we don't have a lot of medical capacity on site, which is where I depend on my partner clinics. It is a very scary notion at first, but I promise it's not as scary as it seems, so I'm excited to talk about it. Some of the history, we've talked about it throughout the conference. This is, the populations and where we came from. It was a simple but really harsh reality that they were focused on population control and public safety, which is like a really challenging thing to put it into perspective of where we are now to where we came from. A lot of the model then was to wait, hold, and euthanize following, and we really have turned that into this beautiful industry that we all are a part of in saving lives, in these positive outcomes. With those positive outcomes comes a lot of work, right? We're focused on adoptions, fostering, life-saving efforts. We're also focused on enriching the animals in our care, spay and neutering to decrease the overpopulation. All of that adds a lot of work to our daily lives. And when we're faced with a lot of challenges, we can't forget that we've come so far, and through partnerships and through collaboration is also how we maintain those values. Capacity for care, everybody's heard of that term before? Most of us, cool. So capacity for care was introduced. The ASV guidelines definition is on the screen, but I think what's really important to point out in this is that it's really sharing those resources that we have for every animal in our care, whether that be staffing, whether it be medical care, enrichment, length of stay, all of those things go into what your building's capacity for care is. It's never going to be the same for every single shelter. Every one will look different. I think it's important to call out too, depending on the time that you're assessing your capacity for care, it's also going to look different in your building. If you're experiencing a staff turnover or you have an influx of animals, that capacity for care in the high seasons might not look like in the low seasons. So it's important to remind yourselves of that it is something that needs to be evaluated often, and it can't just be a one-size-fits-all forever. We're faced with limited support staff, an influx of animals that seems like we are drowning in it some days, and also a veterinary shortage. We are in a tough field. We're all still standing here, but it's definitely not for the weak. You have to have resilience in this field, and part of that resilience comes from the partnerships that you have, whether it be in your shelter or in your communities. That's what keeps the passion alive, at least for me. If you look at some studies about how the staff shortages are impacting, you can definitely see that you have shared challenges, right? So they're more stressed than usual. They might have a more increase of a workload, a higher population. They're not able to provide those same grants or those same programs to the communities that they're working in. All of that takes a toll on the people, right? Like, it's very discouraging to come into work knowing kind of you're stressed, you're low staffed, you have a ton of animals, maybe more behavior dogs than usual or more medical cases than usual. It can seem that there is no end in sight, but there is, I promise, stay with me. With even the veterinary shortage, you can see that in the shelters that don't have a veterinarian on staff, you're looking at almost double your length of stay. It's definitely a theme throughout this whole conference, is how best can we function to minimize that length of stay as much as possible. And in the shelters that don't have vets on staff, we definitely can see in the research kind of what that looks like in relation to the actual animals. So we're seeing that, some of the shelters are closing their intakes because they have no more kennels or they have no more space for pop-ups. We're maybe exceeding like best practices for housing, whether it be too many animals in a kennel or a room. We're also seeing those longer length of stays that we continue to talk about too, that are so important for making sure that the positive outcomes are reached. So all of that in the studies are showing. So we're stronger together as a community, whether it be from a shelter med lens or a general practice lens. We do need community members to invite them into the process of saving lives, because it's an industry that not a lot of people know a ton about. They might have preconceived notions of what animal sheltering is or might have been burned by a previous shelter. All of that is an opportunity for education and growth to really partner and show how beautiful this can be and how they can be a part of the life saving in their own way. We definitely have some different approaches, and I think we need to acknowledge that, right? Like, a clinic might not approach a case the same way as a shelter vet might. And it's important when you're going into these conversations to keep that in mind and have that shared perspective. At the end of the day, nobody got in this field because we didn't like animals, right? Like, that is our common ground that we can build these relationships off of in the initial stages. So I could speak to the shelter med kind of column here. We want, of course, some of our animals stay a little bit longer than their invite was for, but we want to have focus on that short-term care. We want to get them in and we want to get them out into positive outcomes. And sometimes that's challenging, and that can be a bottleneck that we encounter. We're focused on the individual, but we're also focused on the population. Is that one sick animal that you have in your building going to infect your entire population, or is it something that can just be treated on the individual level? Quick population turnover, I'm continuing to talk about because it's important. And we have limited housing, and stress goes up. The handlers, the staff are stressed handling the animals, and sometimes that directly correlates to animals getting sick because they are just stressed all the time and they're not able to get that recovery and rest that they need.
So I can come in from the general practice purview. So, the goals are, I think, for me, as a general practitioner or primary care provider, when a shelter comes to me or I work with a shelter, is setting the ground rules for expectations is really, really important. Setting the ground rules for also bi-directional communication. Bi-directional communication is a great and a very, very important fact of what the expectations are, how do I get the information I need from the shelter staff. I think they talked about sprint transports or whatever in one of the other talks about people driving animals to the vet's offices, and they're coming to the vet's offices. They don't know what's going on. So crafting a form and communication, who am I talking to, who is my point of contact at the shelter, who knows what's going on, because in a private practice setting, there's nothing more frustrating than knowing or not knowing, right? Why is the animal here? How long is it going on? What's the problem? Because as regular veterinarians, they're more focused on the one patient in front of them, not population medicine. Primary care, small animal vets are not trained in population medicine. That is a new novel thing. You're better off talking, to be honest, you'll get a better relation with a mixed animal veterinarian or a large animal veterinarian, a farm vet, because they practice population medicine. They're used to handling herds of animals. Shelters is the same thing. 60 cats is a herd of cats, right? And so it's the same way in terms of management. So if you have that communication, it's understandable. And then also, we are, of course, used to the owner interaction, right? And so I actually had breakfast this morning with someone, and I was saying that I think a lot of regular veterinarians are very flustered or concerned with working with shelters for various reasons, but also we're under the pressure of, we better fix this after the first visit. And I think that's a huge component and factor, also talking about the expectations. If it doesn't get fixed within the first 3 days, it's not the end of the world. Private practice people or consumers are very concerned with that. So having that understanding of what's expected, so like yesterday was talking about URIs, right? Upper respiratory infections. Sometimes it's not better by 3 days. I have clients call me every hour to get the answer, right? So knowing that it's a little bit more leash with a shelter, if it's not better in 3 days, maybe we'll try a different medication or going through a population control and that sort of thing. Takes off the stress of the veterinarian, because once they figure they start seeing one, now they're gonna get flooded with all these shelter animals. And so it just dipped their toe in to get them into the experience.
So when you're starting to approach these clinics that might be in your community that potentially is able to offer your population something, you want to have that foundation laid before you even start having the conversation. I hate nothing more than being in a conversation with somebody who really has no idea what's going on. And you ask them questions and they kind of just give you this blank stare back because they have not done their part to make sure that the partnership will work. So we'll kind of talk about each of these individually, but all of them are equally as important. Data population, you have to look at what you're asking for help, know what you need the help on. Don't just say you need a vet to come into the shelter or you need surgeries done. Give them numbers, give them statistics. Look at those impact reports. You need to really showcase and show the vets who might not be on the ground with you what your building is able to do through intakes, through outcomes, through community partnerships. Your common medical needs are a really big one. If you see a lot of URIs, say that. If you see a lot of clear discharge for animals that are presenting for surgery, disclose that. The more you communicate, the less likely there is to be miscommunications and assumptions, because that will be the death of a partnership, is just assuming the other party is going to see it from your lens without giving your perspective for it. Length of stay, saying it again, very important. That's a lot of where the bottlenecks come from. So if you see a lot of large dogs in your shelter, which I'm sure all of us do, it can be really hard to get that vet care when they start to deteriorate in a shelter. Is it large dogs that are becoming jumpy mouthy in your building that you might need to get heartworm treatment on, or might need a nail trim if they're super challenging like my dog is? You have to assess those bottlenecks and be able to predict them before they happen so you can try to intervene with it there. Is your organization actually prepared for these conversations? Do you have your entire team on board with you before you start approaching these partnered clinics? Do you encounter any potential that there's challenges with certain clinics? Maybe there's some back and forth between the community on which clinic is better and which one's the best. Make sure that you have your team behind you, so in the event that you need to expand that, everybody's on the same page as you are when you're approaching all of these clinics. Scheduling flow. How many shelters or organizations that we work in are short-staffed right now? Yeah, a lot of us. Acknowledge that, right? Are you gonna have volunteers transport your animals to the clinics for surgery? Do you have a foster base that's capable of taking on these medical directives if a vet gives it? All of those things you don't think about when you're first starting to have these conversations because you just wanna know if they're interested in helping. Once you figure out the answers to those questions, you can relate that to whatever clinic you go to because it's ultimately gonna be the same what you're looking for. Community involvement, we kind of touched on with volunteers and fosters. Do you have a strong base of either of those things? The budget, biggest important piece, which we're going to go into a little bit more, but make sure you know your budget. Don't overpromise or stretch your budget too thin if you're not going to be able to deliver on that. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Recognizing barriers. These can be tense conversations, especially internal and external. Be prepared to recognize those barriers that you have, and again, so you're able to intervene with them a little bit easier than before. Do you have local or state legislation that might be, barring you from transporting animals, or is there an LVT who's able to kind of help you with some of this stuff? Staffing limitations. Do you feel like your staff is medically savvy enough to know what a URI looks like? Are they able to do oral medications, ear meds? Your operational bottlenecks. Where do you see the bottleneck? Is it in your intakes with your exams? Is it the animals on stray hold? Is it the animals for outcomes that are post-adoption returns? Identify those, because even if it's not directly encountering with the shelter, you also can pivot these clinics to support your adopter base, support your fosters. Financial and geographic challenges. In Manhattan, it is the worst with travel. So that's a huge part of my clinic's relationship is that transport aspect. Sometimes I send 40 cats in a van in Manhattan over to the next clinic. Nobody knows what's inside our vans when we're driving through, but that transport piece is huge too. So make sure that you've thought about that. Is this clinic too close to you, too far from you to really make that work in the long run?
So talking about veterinary client-patient relationship from the veterinarian's legal standpoint, we often in my profession call this the VCPR, and the veterinary client-patient relationship is actually defined in each state. It's very different. So I'd encourage you to look at your different states. The AVMA, which is my governing body of the veterinary profession, has a definition of what a VCPR is. But again, each state defines what that VCPR is and the timeline and length of that VCPR. So I hate to say this, some of my colleagues don't even know what a VCPR is or what the VCPR stands for in terms of length of time. For example, in my state of New York, there is no definition of what the VCPR is. In terms of length, what does it mean of an examination? There is no definition. And when one of my side hustle, that is something that I'm working on, is defining what a VCPR is. But often that's where veterinarians will say, well, I can't prescribe meds because I don't know what that cat looks like. I don't know what that dog is like. But again, once you approach it from a herd standpoint, then that goes away. So educating many of these small animal primary care veterinarians on what that is, what that means, will then open the door to allow for protocol medicine, right? Not just giving you a bottle of doxycycline and saying give it to any patient you want, because I also believe in antimicrobial resistance. We see that now, right? Resistant URIs or resistant kennel cough disease or canine complex. So having that conversation, and there's resources from many people in this room that could help with negotiating that conversation. God bless you. Negotiating that conversation, because oftentimes the veterinarian or the veterinary hospital manager may say, well, what do you know? You don't know what you're talking about, because they were told the same thing for the last 20 years, and they assume that's the answer, and it's not. So I think through education in an unbiased, unthreatening manner can really help open that door to allow access to care, which is, again, so important in these conditions. So then the next really hot topic in veterinary medicine now is telemedicine capabilities. So once I've established a VCPR, or I feel comfortable with the location, I can do telemedicine consultations, right? COVID taught us that telemedicine and telehealth is a huge opportunity. So I can do care in Manhattan and never go down there. If she puts me on a Zoom call, I know what the facility's like. I've been there within the last year, and I can start doing telemedicine consultations, even with the extension of a LVT. Licensed veterinary technician, CVT or RVT, someone who's trained in that state, if that state has a law. I could have an LVT on the other end, and I could be on a phone camera, right, and say, all right, what does a lung sound like? They're giving me that information. The same thing happens in the human hospitals, if you didn't know. Some rural communities, they may not be a cardiologist on staff, but the cardiologist is wheeled in on a computer, and they're talking to you. There's nothing saying that we cannot do that. So some of you folks in rural communities, there's veterinarians 2, 3, 4 hours away and you don't have that access. If they could schedule some time to come to your facility, know your facility at one point, and then you work with another veterinarian or a technician in your local community or someone who's trained or they're comfortable with, that will open up the doors to telemedicine and telehealth. And I think there is a space for that. It's, again, a very hot topic, but I use it now. So like I do telehealth for my primary care patients, particularly for surgery. I do tons of surgery. So when I do like oral surgeries, for example, I do telehealth consults with the people before the surgery happens. Why do they have to come back in? I've already done a diagnostic plan. I Zoom with them for 15, 20 minutes, go over the plan, and the patient then comes in for a surgery visit. And I actually don't even charge them for that because I just want them to be able to get access to the care. So that can be done in shelter medicine. I've done it for years with my shelter. I do telemedicine via emails. They send me emails of the blood work, I review everything, and I send back a plan. Or if there's large populations of patients. So it's possible, but again, veterinarians are profoundly resistant to change and new ideas. And it just takes a couple of us to figure it out and start talking about it. But again, having that unbiased, unthreatening, I come in peace conversation, I think you could open up some doors to really increase access to care. And eventually, even with some of your community clinics, keep patients out of shelters, which is one of my things I'll talk about later on. So again, we're talking about the in-person consultation. So in most states right now, they're saying that a VCPR must be established via at least one in-person consultation. So if I go to your shelter and I go visit it, that now I established a VCPR once. And most places are saying it's either 6 months or 12 months. So if I do a road trip in 6 months or 12 months, and I'm having good communication skills with the facility, again, that was our biggest conversation at the beginning, was direct lines of bi-directional. Both sides have to communicate very well in order to increase the access to care, and for me, I'd be very comfortable with that. And having teams on the other end, boots on the ground, that are comfortable communicating with me, I will certainly advise them what to do. And it's state by state, so. Next thing was looking at vet record. So in most facilities, you require getting a vet record. A vet record is one who signs off on your protocols, who you may be able to order drugs through. I can, shipping drugs to facilities through my accounts or your accounts, whichever you want to angle that. But having a vet record, creating policies, creating protocols. As we heard in some talks yesterday, there's protocols and policies already in place. You don't have to replicate these things. There's people who can give them to you, and they can be customized to your facility or customized to your needs. Like Leslie said, talking about also budget, right? What can you afford? What's reasonable? And I will tell you, I go in and do some consults in some shelters as well as another side hustle. And there's so much time, I see so much waste of medication, waste of use, waste of staff time, waste of resources, because you're just trying to throw Clavamox at everything. No offense, folks, a lot of times it's a waste of your money. And Clavamox is expensive. I don't know why everyone's using name brand Clavamox. I think that's silly. There's a generic Clavamox that's liquid and human version. It's $4 a bottle. Why are we spending $15 a bottle for really expensive medication? But most people don't even know that. They just know Clavamox. There's a generic amoxicillin clavulanic acid, way cheaper, has a longer stabilization time, and you can also fraction it out. So just some things to think about. But having a vet of record can talk to you about that and can find better pricing.
This was my hardest part when starting these conversations, and I had to remind myself, and at times I had other people remind me too. It's a partnership. It's not just a transfer of services. It's not just about money. It's about that partnership and that relationship piece. Vets, of course, and clinics are all responsible for life-saving too, but they're treating the pet in front of them, and that shelter is kind of out of sight, out of mind for them. They don't see the populations that are in the kennels or coming through the doors or being unloaded from transport. Make them see it. Have those conversations about how you're not only saving the life of the animal in front of you, but you're also saving a life that we can replace in that kennel once that animal is adopted. And it's something that I've used as like a tool in a lot of those conversations to keep the momentum going, because it is about a partnership. It's not just about service. Open communication is something that we continually talk about. Are you prepared for being available for these clinics? Do you want a point of contact for them? Is there an email that's the best? At my center, we have an emergency line that's 24 hours and our fosters are able to reach us at. Usually the partner clinics aren't calling me at 2 a.m. to ask why their cat is sneezing, but we all transfer that line between 4 people, so it's not all on one person, and those 4 people know our protocols. They're able to approve things that the vets are looking for. And they're able to transfer that workload a little bit, so it's not just one person. We did not start like that. I was doing all of the partner clinics to really establish those relationships to make sure that they were good and strong when we got more people involved in that. It took time. Relationships take time. Although I wish they happened overnight, they don't. So giving yourself and the clinic the grace to have that open line of communication. If something's not working, address it. Don't just ignore it, because it's probably going to get worse, or it's probably not going to wind up working out for you in the end. There's appropriate ways to address things, and there's not appropriate ways. So one of the things that I do with my clinics is check-ins. Like, I meet with them quarterly, even if it's just to see how things are going, to check in with them, sometimes for like a social aspect too, just so they put a face to the organization. Like, I will talk to them, and if we are having challenges, I want to know what we can do better and what I need them to do better. Because a lot of the times you're not looking at the other person's perspective, you're just focused on what you need at the end of the day. One of our partner clinics, it was about records, right? Like, I don't really handle the records as much. Like, I just email them over. I don't really look at them. And it was something really silly that they didn't know what a certain selection in our system meant. And that was like a really easy way for me to just be like, oh, well, that means this. And then the problem was solved. Not all the problems are that easy, trust me. But a lot of the times it's just having that open communication that if they do need to say something or you need to say something, you have that mutual respect and understanding. Your success can be immense, right? Like, you have an entire adoption pool of people that are new pet owners a lot of the times who need those connections. If this partnership works out, there's so many different ways that you can partner in the future to benefit both parties. We talk about this a lot in when we have these like really complex medical cases. Can you use that for publicity, for your shelter to get more funds, for the clinic to get more attention in the media? Like, is there a way to highlight those cases? Even if you don't have complex cases, can you refer adopters? Some vets are willing to do, a free first exam or a discount on vaccines. Whatever it might be, at least it's bridging that gap in a way and opening the door for adopters to feel like they have places to go. You have to know your financial limits, but you also have to know the opportunities that you have. And this is where collaboration, even internally, comes into play to make sure that your team is also voicing their opinions. Every single person is going to have a different perspective on this. And it's good to hear what other people have to say about it. You have to clearly communicate, this is like the most important part, with these clinics on what your expectation is and what your hope is, but you also have to be mindful of the vet's time and that their time is just as valuable as our time is, and we don't want to waste it. Some clinics, some shelters have been burned by the other parties, and they're like, I don't want to work with them anymore. Like, that was too crazy, it was too much. And you have to recognize that and know that when you're having these conversations. Don't overpromise. We've talked about this before, but be honest. It's like all I keep saying, be honest and communicate. That's like the biggest pieces of this partnership that you guys are looking for.
And I would say other thing here is that when you initiate or develop a relationship, talking about, well, what would happen if this, what would we do if this happened, right? So before it actually happens. So say I had one of the stories before, you had a dog hit by a car and has a broken legs. Does any of the doctors here do orthopedics before it comes up and now you scramble? Because maybe, and having these periodic conversations with them, because maybe they hired a new doctor who's starting to dabble in orthopedics, And I'll tell you, not that I want to say to practice on them, but we are practicing on them. I find that it's a great resource to grow new young veterinarians. And I've only been a veterinarian for 13 years almost, but these new young veterinarians coming out of vet school are not as prepared as they were 15 or 20 years ago. They're not given as much education. They're taught tertiary or quaternary referral statuses, and they need all these very expensive pieces of equipment. They need all these things, and they're not used to, well, if everything doesn't have a full blood panel, urinalysis, and a CAT scan, and an MRI, and all this other stuff, they're paralyzed. But there are practices who have veterinarians who are like, I love to dabble in more orthopedics. I love to do more femoral head and neck osteectomies. I don't get a chance. Or I refer every single one of them out. But if I had less of a upset client barking at my ear, it would make me more likely to do these surgeries, right? Doing TICAs or TICABOos or full mouth extractions. It gives them the ability to practice under the comfort of not being yelled at or scolded by a client, and that could be used to your maximum abilities. So having those conversations and saying, well, what would you charge? Some of the practices like mine, I may not charge anything because I'm going to look at it as a doctor growth opportunity. I can send a doctor away to a class for the weekend and spend $5,000. I might as well put that money towards goodwill building in my animal shelter environment, in my community. And again, giving them a shout out on a social media page really helps boost it, and appreciating them and saying thank you to them, and thank you to their team and their nursing team, right? Because like many of you raise your hands, you have shortages, I have shortages as well. I have a hard time finding staff. I have a hard time maintaining the staff. I've had to pay them more. I've had to increase my budgets. So having those kind of conversations ahead of time before it occurs is really, really important. So again, we all know what to expect from one another, and keeping that lines of communication open are so critical. Most veterinary practices usually get burned by shelters because they never got paid, because they were expecting to get paid and didn't get paid. So having that communication, and then there was always confusion. No one knew what was going on. No one knew when the animals were coming. And please, please, please don't schedule something and don't show up. Don't promise them 20 cats and you bring only 10 because they blocked off time for the 20. That is the hugest thing. Or as soon as it happens, call them and say, I only got 10. Okay, maybe I can then backfill some appointments because I'm telling people I can't book things out. So talking about it and just don't roll up and say, yeah, we're down by half. Well, now I brought on more staff for the day. I've done more stuff. I've ordered supplies. It just hits my bottom line too.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we do with clinics who are more of like a long-term treatment plan, we do MOUs for them, which we'll talk about later too, that kind of makes it a little bit quicker when they don't need to call us. Sometimes there's pre-approval things that they're able to do without needing to talk to me directly, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Be creative, but stay realistic, right? Like the vet's time, again, is just as valuable as our time in that partnership. So these are some of the things that have worked for either my partnerships or his partnerships that we wanted to share with you. Consider bundles. Like, can they do an intake bundle with you? If they're doing exams, can you pay a higher exam fee, but have dewormers or preventatives included in that fee? It's the same kind of principle as bulk pricing. It can do a lot when it comes to negotiating where you're both benefiting from the long run. Look, I'm like all tongue-tied now. You're benefiting in the long run, having those conversations and posing those before you say like, oh, that bill's kind of high. Like we never talked about that. Be proactive in those communications with the packages. Trade value. Is there something that we can offer that's not like money, right? Like there's other things that we can offer in addition to money, but do they want visibility on social media? Maybe we have a bigger platform than them. We have a platform full of pet owners. Maybe they want that time on our social media for a shout out or for, hey, we're partnered with this clinic, they're offering so-and-so. Those are all kind of unique things that could also benefit the clinic on the big picture. Staff training too, like maybe we pay them in a way, if we're sending 25 surgeries to a clinic, maybe they're willing to take one of our staff along and show them what recovery looks like, have them help with that. They can also train your staff to be able to identify some of those medical things that are baseline, and even if it's not your staff directly, maybe the point of contact can step into that role and then in turn train your team back on the ground. Leveraging the in-house capabilities, super important, is making sure that your staff is trained to identify those problems and identify those medical symptoms before it turns into pneumonia or before there's a serious problem that then the vets get involved and there is a hefty bill behind that. Make sure your team is trained for that, and there's ways and resources all over that we can help you provide that really gets your team all on the same page. and Dr. Joe talked about the importance of veterinary students, getting that practice in, they're supervised by vets, almost all of the time. It's really a unique way too that, again, benefits the clinic, but also is getting what we need to get done at the same time.
Something to add is like trade value from low-hanging fruit. Sometimes a vet clinic just wants to know where they could send an animal when it's dropped off at their office or someone brought a box of kittens in. And again, if you're going to be willing to take, you could have the capacity. If I have a relationship with a shelter, I easily could say, yeah, have the client bring it in versus send them back out the door. Because most of the time, we're like, what are we going to do with these box of kittens? Right? Maybe a staff member takes them home, but now I'm dealing with adoptions and that sort of stuff through myself as a for-profit practice. But then saying, you know what, yeah, we'll bring it in and we have an agreement with so-and-so, I'm gonna make a phone call, they're gonna come get the box of kittens because I squeezed in a bunch of the stuff, right? I did some extra space for them, I did a dental for them, you take the box of kittens and I'll spay them for you for free, but again, allows it now to get adopted out. And that's kind of a, reciprocal relationship that's a good opportunity that doesn't take too much and it builds morale for my staff. Right, because we took it in, we helped them, we were involved in that. Maybe they were going to do the foster care for you, but then when the fostering's over, they have to go through somewhere and something to get adopted, and you guys are the conduit for that.
Relationships are a lot of work. They don't happen overnight. We kind of already talked about this again. Julie said before in the conference kickoff that it's about playing to win. It's not about playing not to lose. Don't be discouraged. If one of these partner clinics maybe is not interested in working with you or has been burned in the past, that's okay. Like there's plenty of clinics that we can reach out to, whether it be telemedicine, whether it be in maybe in another county. It might be a little bit extra work on our part, but don't be discouraged. There's clinics out there who want to work with you. Sometimes they might need a little bit of a push and some encouragement. Vets love food, so if you bring some donuts or coffee, you usually can win them over pretty quickly. Be patient with yourselves and be patient with your team when you're navigating those conversations, because some of them are going to fail. My relationships fail on a day-to-day basis, but it's about building it back up and maybe rectifying the mistake when you made it. If you want a good partner, you have to be a good partner. You are going to put in just as much work as the clinic might be putting in to make that relationship work. I love this cat. He is at the sanctuary. His name is Rocket, and he never looks like he's like fully there. He doesn't really know what's going on. He just kind of has this like deadpan stare. Don't be Rocket. You want to be engaged in conversations and you want to be available and know what's going on. So don't be like Rocket. Be flexible and understanding for both sides. You might have had the worst day ever, but the clinic might have too. So be patient with each other and offer that mutual respect. Give them grace in conversations and then maybe try it again a different day. You have to be willing maybe to take some criticism from time to time and take that and make changes according to whatever they say. Some of the changes might not be realistic and you might not be able to control the thing that they're asking you. I hear a lot, can you send me healthy, amazing animals that are super nice and ready for surgery? I have no control over that. Sometimes I get spicy ones off of transport, but some of the times it could be as simple as communication. Is there a different way, a method that we can communicate? Can we try email? Can we try a group text? Whatever it might be willing to make adjustments because it's a relationship at the end of the day. MOUs, so for the animals that are more long-term or maybe presenting for surgery that morning, have an expectation set before you encounter that situation. If you're comfortable and the vet is comfortable who's doing the surgery, if it has a heart murmur, maybe we don't do an echo and we proceed with a cardiac safe protocol. See how they feel about that before you have a cat in front of you that you have a transport pickup lined up for. Now you got to tell the foster you canceled and you got to cancel the event it's supposed to go to. Have a conversation before you start encountering those problems. If the animal is staying at the clinic and it has an upper respiratory infection, maybe we can offer our protocols that we do in-house that's pre-approved, that even if the cat was here in our shelters, we probably would proceed in a similar route. Be willing to compromise because you're not going to get your way all the time. You can try so hard, but you will not get your way all the time. Be willing to compromise and make sure your team is willing to compromise as well. Sometimes it's players in a conversation that are putting the most pressure on this partnership that aren't even talking to the clinics. Make sure that they're aware of where the clinic is drawing a line in the sand, what's the most important to them, and what's at their bottom line to make sure that you have the team members in your court on the same page.
So this is an example of a patient that I worked with, animal shelter actually in Dutchess County. New York. This is a cat named Rogue, and unfortunately I didn't have any videos of her, but we have just a photo. So this cat came in through, I think it was a stray, picked up off the street in the city of Poughkeepsie, and she had some breathing issues. They thought she had a URI. Initially they treated her for the URI. It wasn't getting better. They took some x-rays and they found she had a diaphragmatic hernia. And so unfortunately, those could be difficult to treat. Many veterinarians don't do surgery on them. They require a lot of work. And so here's her x-ray. So you can see on here, on the right side, all her abdominal contents are up in her chest, up around her heart. They're not supposed to be tickling the heart. So you shouldn't be finding the liver up there, or the stomach, or the intestines. There's a very thin membrane that separates those two cavities. And so they sent me this x-ray and said, would you do this? I'm like, heck yes, I would. And so this is a good, strong point of a partnership, right? And so most people would take this patient to a specialty hospital now, and depending on the area of your country, this cat could be costing you $10,000 to $15,000. And that's not my game, not my interest, because I love these kinds of surgeries. And I said, sure as heck. Sorry, I curse a lot, so I just didn't want to curse. So, and so I'll take it on. And this cat did great. She was definitely a fun one to do anesthesia on because there was not enough room in her abdomen to put all the guts back in. So once I took all the guts out of her chest, now her abdomen's kind of too shrunk. So you had to like kind of stuff it all back in there and stitch it really quickly, and now it like must feel like she has a corset on. But she lived at our clinic for a few days and then went home and then was adopted out 2 weeks later. And that was because we were able to do that for a lower cost than going to a specialty hospital in the tri-state area. I think it was a few $1,000s. Still a lot of money. I'm not saying it wasn't a lot of money, but she had around-the-clock care with my practice as well. So this is because of a partnership. These are some examples of partnerships. So this cat, this is Tuna Roll. He's a really, really true living proof of a partnership. This cat actually came from the shelter that I work with. I work with a shelter called Pets Alive out of Middletown, New York. Actually, I'm a board president and chairman of that organization for the last 10 years. And I do almost all the medical for that organization, except for the high volume spay neuter. I don't do as much. They use a facility for that. This cat, unfortunately, was adopted out by the organization, I think as a kitten. And then he would present to a veterinary practice. He had a foreign body. And the veterinary practice, one, doesn't do surgery, so that was useless. And then they had nowhere else to go. They were pressed with a $10,000 surgical bill somewhere. And so they were surrendered back to the shelter. They didn't have the means to take care of him. But this cat ended up having a linear foreign body that he sat on for over a week until he finally got back to the shelter and said, we can't keep him. Can you take him? I appreciate them not euthanizing him and returning him back to where he came from, and we were able to handle it. And so I have a surgery video, so hopefully no one's too gory here, but I love surgery videos. I'm a surgeon and a criticalist, so like, this is what I do all day, hence why I was on the phone before. Uh-oh.
We have the best internet here.
I know, yeah. So anyway, so this cat had 33 perforations throughout his bowel. So he had 33 perforations Tuna Roll from there was a linear foreign body under his tongue, in his stomach, down his duodenum, into the jejunum, and the rest of the bowel. And there was perforations along the entire line of the stomach. It was a string, the intestinal tract. And so now what do? As a surgeon, I sit there and say, I can't take all this bowel out. We're screwed. And I hate doing resection anastomosis. As a surgeon, I love doing them. Resection anastomosis, for those who don't know, that's where I take a section of the intestines out, and then I cut that piece out, and I marry the two pieces together. That once you do that, you have a 50% failure rate immediately off the gate. So as a surgeon, I always avoid RNAs. It is my golden rule, unless the bowel is black, we keep it in. Because I'll go back in and fix it later, but I'd rather keep it in, because if I keep it what God gave it, it's better off getting off the table and living out of my hospital. So what I did was I went through and I cleaned up and closed all 33 of his perforations, did an abdominal lavage, I placed the JP or one of the grenade drains on him, and he lived, right? He was in the ICU.
Oh, it's the same one.
I wish. So there was perforations throughout the bowel, but he lived. And then, I felt bad for the people, right? Because do we give it back to them? Or they have the abilities to do that or not? They actually ended up having some questionable truth-telling on it, and so we ended up saying no. We rehomed him. What happened? He actually he didn't fall in love. I guess he fell in love. He fell in love, and my head technician fell in love with him, and then Tuna Roll lives with my surgery tech. So we ended up saving Tuna Roll, and he does great now. He's a happy cat, no GI issues, no bowel issues. I saved his bowel, but that's from a partnership. He could have been euthanized anywhere else, Any other surgeon opening that cat would have said, heck no, never mind. But I kept that cat for a while. Another thing I think that comes with partnerships, again, because I'm a softie, I keep these patients for long term at my practice. So, and I don't charge my shelter for them. I don't charge shelters for hospitalization either. They stay at my practice 24/7 with around-the-clock nursing care because I always am, my main goal is outcomes. I want 100% outcome or survival. I don't ever send a patient home. Even if a client has had money, I keep them and I just deal with it later. But again, I'm a rarity. You're not going to find a lot of vets like me, which is fine. I've learned that now. But I don't want the animal to go home and fail because that's my work. If I have a failure rate, that's a scar on my reputation and my craft, and I do not want failure rates. So I push through, and I'm always available for follow-up, and I keep these shelter pets there because I have around-the-clock nursing care. Shelters don't. There's no one there usually at night. So if you need an intensive care patient, they stay at my practice, and they're getting rehabilitated for 2 weeks. I'll keep them for 2 or 3 weeks. It's not a pressing to me.
You definitely have a new adopter pool too. I cannot tell you how many times I get a call from the partner clinic saying, oh, my tech wants to adopt this cute little kitten. I don't know how many more of them need animals. I feel like I have fully supplied them of all of their animals that they're looking to adopt, but you also have that aspect of the partnership that you don't think about when you're first starting this. It's expanding those relationships within the community. I know we have 10 minutes left. I know this is a very question-driven PowerPoint. I asked you guys a lot of questions, but I want to leave time in case you have any questions for us.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh.
Come up to the front.
Oh,
Thanks.
sorry, back there.
I guess she's gonna work her way up, so you'll get it.
Sorry. So for foster-based rescues, would you feel comfortable doing that telemedicine with an animal that's not maybe in a facility, but is being cared for via an organization?
For me, yeah, I would, because as long as I know the organization itself, right? Because your organization could have multiple locations. If it's foster only, I'm not gonna go to every foster home. That's impossible.
Right.
But again, if I know the organization, so like Lexi said, as long as I feel comfortable with the communication, who I'm talking with, who's my point of contact, that gives me the comfort to then start dispensing medications, seeing patients, or having them come in for drop-offs, or seeing my vet tech team, my nurse team, I call it.
Right.
And so that is something that as long as we have a communication I know, my comfort goes way up.
And is that where those memorandums of understanding come into play?
Yeah, it definitely is, and that's where you can help navigate those conversations because it really is a structure to those. The one thing I will warn is that our foster base is amazing. They're MVPs. They do the work that we all do for free. They are amazing, but they also might not be as willing to participate in those conversations directly with the vet. Make sure your fosters are checking in with you first before they start talking to the vets and the adopters, because sometimes that's when the communication can fall apart because it's a big, oh, well, he said this, she said this, and now I'm here with this cat with a big bill attached. Foster's a little bit different than adopters, but definitely just keep that in mind too. The MOUs can structure those conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I make my way up? Here you are. Thank you.
I don't even know if I need this, but okay. This might be a short, long story. It might be something I have to reach out to you afterwards, but we had created a really great partnership with a vet in our local area that has 6 different vet offices, and he was looking to expand because he didn't have a whole lot of business at that time. So we created a memorandum that had a rate for spay and neuters and everything else, and in conjunction with that, he was going to give us a discount for 6 months on all of our adopters. And then we would promote him as being the vet for the rescue, so all of our dogs would go to him, right, post-adoption. We even, had him as a sponsor in some of our community events and stuff like that. He kind of screwed that up and didn't really show up on time and didn't have what we thought, and then we started to get a lot of complaints from our pet parents. And a lot of missed billing. We gave them our credit card to put on account, so if there was a spay or a neuter that came in, they would charge it automatically, and then they started charging us for things where post-adoption parents came in, and so we pulled that off the account, and it created this big thing. It's like, no, we have to have a credit card account. I'm like, no, not until, we pay our bills, like our bills are paid daily. So I think that this is a really complex relationship we have to navigate because he does do good work. And he is the cheapest spay and neuter that we have at this point in our area because we're in California. But at the same time, he also, because I know some of the back end stuff, he's making all of his money on upcharging everybody. So if somebody comes in for, they just need a vaccination, he wants to do 10,000 different blood panels and, everything else to make money up that way. And we're not really comfortable with that. So I don't even know what my question is, but we're trying to figure out how to really navigate that partnership and relationship, because we do want to be able to have that partnership with him. But at the same time, like, we've spent the greater part of the last couple months being his customer service, because people are mad at the way that they're treated when they go to the vet. So
I'm like
So do you have
smiling
a
to
point of
myself
view
because
about that?
So I think we need to figure out like how to create a better
I'm like smiling to
MOU
my,
or something like that.
I'm smiling to myself because I have encountered all of those at one clinic specifically. You have to be vulnerable in the conversation at first and just say like, listen, like this is where we're at, we're able to provide, maybe just revisit the first conversation you had to realign it. Maybe things have changed on the clinic side, maybe things have changed on your side and you're not aware. The adopter side of it might be a little bit different of a conversation, but if it's your animals though, I would just encourage you to have a conversation, but also know maybe to look for a different clinic. And if they're not going to align and you're continuing to see these challenges, like maybe it's time to try an alternate clinic. Maybe revisit pricing with other clinics.
We spent over $60,000 with him personally through the rescue last year, and we gave him like almost 400 pet parents. And so for us, we're like, I think we're pulling our side, right? We're pulling our part.
Definitely just need to recognize though, if they're not going to meet you where you need them to be and they're not going to respect what you're bringing to the relationship, like I would encourage you to find a different partner maybe and reevaluate some of those prices with a different partner and see if they can offer you a different bundle or something. Yes.
So we've had some pretty good relationships with veterinarians in our community. What I've found is since we have started low-income wellness clinics for our clients and low-cost public spay-neuter, we've encountered a little resistance. Now, we've tried to communicate on the basis of these people otherwise wouldn't get veterinary care. But I just wondered if either of you had any insight on how to smooth out those little bumps.
So I would say is that sitting around the veterinary table in New York State, the leadership of New York State, I'm also the president of the New York State Vet Medical Society. And so 12 years ago, that was the biggest topic. Spay-neuter clinics were popping up, and every veterinarian who was sitting around the room said, they're going to destroy us, they're taking away all the business. And I'll tell you that, yes, the bread and butter for them is vaccination, but as you pointed out, the majority of those people who go to those vaccination clinics will not be seeking care at their offices. And say it louder. Yeah, I'll scream it. And so that's another thing, and I battle that with my colleagues. So I do low-cost or free vaccination clinics throughout the Hudson Valley and in New York City, and that's the main thing. These people will never, ever go to a veterinary practice. They may go to an emergency practice, but those practices are not doing emergency services. They're not adding on too many add-ons. So again, it's something that to educate them that they will never be the clientele that you're going to see, or at least they're going to come in a little more prepared and vaccinated already, and those clinics don't want to see parvo. So would you rather see more parvo cases and euthanize parvo cases, or you want to give low-cost vaccines to the community? And so I think that is a huge thing of a discussion. I think veterinarians are now learning that there's other ways to make money in veterinary practice than through vaccination and even spays and neuters. The clientele or consumers' requests of veterinarians has gotten a lot deeper, more advanced, and that's where we have to be playing in and being more diagnosticians and problem solvers. I tell folks, I didn't go to vet school to pump a vaccine. Like, that is not where I make my money. That is not what excites me every day. It is disease prevention, yes it is, but it does not get me excited on a day-to-day basis to solve those problems.
I think the one thing I'll add to that too is like, try to put a face to the organization. Sometimes, I mean, it's really easy to maybe say not the nicest things about other orgs if you don't know anybody in those organizations. So even if it's just like dropping off something or just being present, that they have that like personal connection with you, sometimes it can help.
We moved into a vet clinic next door.
Oh, right there. Yeah, good.
So as a quick aside, it's a story I had with a veterinary colleague of mine in Oklahoma. I was actually at a meeting with him at the beginning of the month in Charleston, and he said to me, we deal with parvo all the time, Joe, and all this other stuff, and they don't use the parvo antibody, they can't afford it, right? And so it's very, very expensive, but patients do survive after it's given. And I said, all right, so if you can't afford that, he said, yeah, Joe, these people come in, they only have like $300 for parvo treatment in rural Oklahoma. I said, that's great. I said, how much does a tray of vaccine cost you? He said, a lot of money. I said, why don't you go to those hot spots and give out free vaccines? You could do as a community event. The vaccine doesn't cost very much money. Show up there, send your technicians in for the community for the weekend, and just do vaccines and go back in 3 weeks and boost the entire community. How horrible is that? Now your team doesn't get drained, they're not upset, and you just built goodwill within the community of giving out a free tray of vaccines. And if you ask the vaccine company, they'll give it to you for free. right? And he's like, I didn't think about that. So a lot of times these veterinarians, they don't think, right? They don't think of what the opportunities are, the possibilities, until it's talked to them about. And sometimes it has to be another colleague to talk to them and say, dude, boom, are you not listening? And I think about it.
I think we're, maybe have one more question.
We have a minute left.
1 minute, so let me pop over
Minute and
here
30.
since this hand went up.
That's our contact information, so if you have questions and don't want to talk, feel free to email us. We're always here.
I'm in California, and I work with a small home-based foster for cats. How do we find a vet that would be like you, that here, because you can't, I don't think you can treat our animals here. And, you know, we're facing, you know, we get lots and lots of kittens in, and we're facing, we can't get their medication unless we bring them in the office, you know, you get the whole thing. And now we have no money, it's our money. So we don't want anything for free, but we need to make it so we could afford this.
So we talked earlier about the budget, and that's sometimes when you go to some veterinarians, again, you have to work the room of veterinarians, and sometimes it's going to like for the California VMA, going to the California VMA website, and a lot of times they'll tell you who's a member within your region, and that is a good list to start with of veterinarians, and then going to them saying, listen, for our entire year that we have for discretionary income or expenses is $5,000 for the entire year. Can you work with that? Like, that's all I have for drugs and everything else. What can you do, or do you have any interest to that? And that's often what opens the lines of communication,
Well,
saying, I have
do
that.
we go to the site, and how do we know which vet to ask this question?
There is no way to know what vet, you have to just start calling them.
Okay.
And just set up meetings. Say, hey, do you mind if I borrow 10 minutes of Dr. So-and-so's time? I want to see if they want to work with a shelter and kind of give you a thing. You're going to get a lot of no's, but it doesn't mean you can't keep trying to get a couple yeses. You have to get out there. There's work involved, for sure.
Okay.
Her relationships in New York City are not easy, because they also, many of them are, not everyone's open to this, but the ones who are willing to, or like sometimes their staff is. So like some of my staff members are doing a kitten orientation because they love doing hand rearing of kittens. They're going to hold the kitten class for the community through my organization. So.
Well, you could move, Long Beach is a very nice city, you could move here.
What'd she say?
Palm Beach is very nice.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Reach out
everyone.
with any questions.